Let's see. So this is so hard to tell, and I haven't done this in a while, but am I live now? And can somebody like inform me of that? Um, yeah, this is tough. I'm not good at YouTube anymore. It looks like it's good. Okay. So if anybody can just confirm that, then that would be awesome. Okay, great. Yeah, boy, I just talked to nobody for like 20 minutes. So let's start over, I guess. And first, to start out, I do want to say that I don't hold personal animosity against any of the post-liberal people. And this is just kind of the nature of YouTube. You're always having these conflicts, and I think that's good. That's kind of what I'm arguing for, that we ought to engage in these conflicts and even enjoy them. I think they should be enjoyable. I have a good time with them, and I made that video because I thought partly it was in good humor. So I think I offended some people, and I actually do genuinely apologize for that. I don't actually like all of the post-liberal guys. Like, I have personal problems with Imperius. I question some of their lifestyles. That's not to say that they're wrong because of this, but I think that is a symptom of one aspect of their intellectual error, which is moral nihilism. But that doesn't mean I'm not willing to talk to them. I'm definitely willing to talk to anybody if I disagree with you. And so that's why I'm doing this stream, to reply to comments, because I don't actually have time on my own to, go through at the keyboard and respond to everything. But that is part of my philosophy. I should respond when people have critiques. So Big Boy Cleric says, it's very inconsistent to call others feds while you unironically advocate for globalism via fear-mongering. It's not inconsistent because I put forward an argument for globalism, yes, in a sense based on fear-mongering, but it was an argument from existential threat, which is a legitimate form of argument. So unless you want to argue against that, this is not inconsistent with not being a Fed. So I don't agree there. And I'm not going to stop saying I think that Kurt Doolittle is a Fed, because I still do, and I think we should be thinking in those terms. If someone posts like a Fed, like I say here, it may be that they are a Fed, and we have to keep that possibility in mind. And the whole, like, oh, don't call people out for thinking they're Feds, it's kind of like, wouldn't that be convenient for the Feds to say? But I don't know what else to say there. I defend my calling people out as Feds, and it's really only Kurt. Who else have I said? John Mark? Well, he's synonymous with Kurt, basically. So let's go on. This guy, I think, agrees with me, and I'm not going to follow this whole discussion. And this was a good point. I did give short shrift to the Continentals in general. It's not like I think that continental Europe is devoid of positive scientific advances. Clearly it was. Nazi Germany arguably was ahead, and the Kaiser's Reich was also ahead of its contemporaries technologically. I think that was largely due to German engineering, however, and not the philosophical schools which were prominent in Germany. And when I give the dichotomy between analytical philosophy and continental philosophy, I'm really talking about the kind of like pursuit of epistemological clarity, analytical thinking, trusting in logic, versus continental thinking in terms of postmodernism, where it's about developing these interesting narratives. And someone like Foucault, for instance, he has very good intuitions about social processes. And it's not like he never gives actual data to support his observations. And he's literary, and he's fun to read even. And I like reading some of their writings. I like reading Heidegger, right? He has an interesting style. But I don't think that it leads to as decidable of results as someone like, Boole or Frege, or, I don't like Bertrand Russell. There are bad analytical philosophers as well. And so I definitely characterized the situation there, and I think a couple other people called me out on this, and that's fair. That is fair. But it's not really the point I was driving at. I'd be happy to talk to Keith Woods, so I'm fine with that. And Kurt, of course, did show up in the comments, and he doesn't think I understand his system, but I am arguing in good faith, so he doesn't have a problem with that. I think I understand underlying your system what it's really based on. It's based on what you want society to be like, and that's not justified by anything. Fundamentally, he's a moral nihilist, so it has to be that way. Like, why should we have the world be this way rather than some other way? He says, well, he kind of inductively argues that this is what people want, and therefore this is what we ought to do. But that's a kind of naturalistic fallacy. You can't induce ethics exactly, because it never justifies why we should have these preferences that we demonstrate. So he doesn't have a logically consistent end state that we really should pursue. That's a problem. And then his epistemological axioms are axioms, and all the points that I made in the video. But I think that he commented a couple more times, and I didn't read everything that he posted, so I'll try to get through it. I have about an hour and a half, and I'll try also to look at the live chat as much as I can, but there's a lot to get through here, so I'll try to go quick. And have you even read, Jib D says, have you even read The Post-Liberals? I suggest you read Chris Bond's recently released book, Nemesis. In it, he addresses Locke and his ideological compatriots from post-liberal perspective. I started on Nemesis. I'm going to finish it, but I have other stuff that I'm reading. But this is the problem. The reason I said, have you even read Locke? The reason I took this angle was to mock them, because this is what they do. They point to a reading list and say, if you haven't read all this stuff, then you can't legitimately attack our system. But that is not true. No, if I understand one thing about your system, I can attack that one thing. If you think your system is such that one part of the system relies on the entire system, it's problematic in that how is anyone ever supposed to engage with you unless they basically convert to your system in the first place? Like, why should I read all your books? If I'm to be persuaded by it, if I first have to actually go through and read everything that's in it, it's like that. Do you see how that's a problem? I think it should be clear to people. And then Imperious. So my name is a bad faith actor, an unstable person. I don't know why you think I'm an unstable person. I have a family, I have a house, I have a stable job. It's not clear to me why he would say I'm an unstable person. Because I don't like you, because I don't like Imperious, that makes me unstable. And why am I a bad faith actor? Because I disagree with you? Because I'm calling you out? I don't think that's acting in bad faith. If I refused to argue with you, that would be acting in bad faith. Or if I, just wasn't taking the argument seriously and was just putting forward kind of talking points to persuade the argument, or rather persuade the audience. So he says, confirmed by myself and multiple other perspectives, hardly some cult decree. He's read almost nothing of our recommended reading list. I read plenty of things that he sent to me very early on, and I had certain problems, namely that they seemed to be inherently nihilistic and they seemed to presuppose nominalism. They also seemed to presuppose the impossibility of arriving at metaphysical truth with language. It's built into the linguistic theory. If language emerges out of this social process, language is always consigned in some sense to be a social tool. So that's kind of what I'm getting at here. The fundamental dispute is not some particular technical part of your system. It's the whole system. It's the fact that it's nihilistic, and thus that we can't actually agree how we all ought to live. Structurally, we can't all agree how we ought to live because there's no real ought statements. There's just going to be whether you aesthetically align with it and what's kind of pragmatically going to keep society together. But why should we want to? That question can't be really justified from within the system. So yeah, again, you don't have to say, or you can't say that you have to read everything in a philosophical school to argue with any part of it. No. And I'm arguing with the fundamental part, the foundation of your system. Nihilism, nominalism, and denying the possibility of metaphysics means we can't cooperate and agree in the ways that I'd like to cooperate and agree. And I think I made those points in the last video. And he barely ever engaged us. I engaged with them early on, and I was still in the server, the post-liberal server, for a while, and I just wasn't impressed by the discussion going on there. And it was always assuming their set of heuristics. Like, they like the Juvenalian analysis. I like it in certain ways. I like certain elements of generative anthropology's analysis, the ostensive, imperative, declarative dialectic, like how it progresses. I think it's neat. I don't think it's confirmed or like obviously correct. I think it's an interesting hypothesis. And so basically they take these heuristics from this certain set of literature and kind of just run with them. And it seems like they're doing that in order to build up this following. And just based on his personality, it seems that's how Imperius is. He spends a lot of time on his server. He likes people looking up to him. And I think this is evidence here that he's actually not arguing good faith, because he's not arguing anything that I said. He's just saying, I haven't read enough of their books. I'm an unstable person and a bad faith actor. I mean, that's literally ad hominem. I made an argument. He didn't address it. That's arguing in bad faith. Barely engaged us and is here for some reason calling us post-liberalists. Well, because the meme I was quoting in the title was from Sargon. He was a liberalist. I thought it was kind of funny. There's only so much time in a day. Yeah, that's why I wasn't engaging with you guys all that much. I don't see much benefit in bending over backwards for him. I'll just unsubscribe and forget about him. Right, because he knows that I'm capable of understanding the presuppositions underlying their whole system and stating the fact that they are presupposed. And so he doesn't want his people to watch me or hear my arguments. He would rather they ignore me and not have to deal with what I have to say, which just reinforces the point I was making in the whole video. Like, if we want to arrive at the truth, we need to take account of all these perspectives. And he's given no reason for thinking, in this comment alone, he's given no reason for thinking that he can actually address the arguments I made. Like, that we ought to consider free speech a right, a human right, and inalienable. Because if we don't, then we'll have this problem where people can set up elaborate obscurantist literatures and get people hooked into them and never engage in debate where you'll actually expose the problems in the worldview. And it leads to this kind of solipsism where people go into their own little spheres and get stuck there. And I don't think that's good pragmatically for, the right in general, if you want to consider all of this a right-wing dispute. I also have no problem having these little quarrels. I don't want islands. I want, more like the Germanic tribes constantly at war with one another. What does that produce? Eugenics, right? Selection. We want to evolve, not hide and, isolate ourselves from criticism. So he thinks, no, this is somebody defending me. So thank you, Hun Ivan. So in my phone call with him, he called Adam a manipulator, yet admitted he's never talked to him, nor read much, if any, of his writings, and if any is critical there. This is the kind of dishonesty that he will use. I did not say I didn't read anything of Adam. I said I read a few of his articles. Not much, because he has pages and pages on his blog going way back, right? But that's different than saying I haven't read him at all. And sometimes there are certain tendencies in a person's language use that will allow you to derive certain conclusions. Like, if I think he's using language manipulatively and not trying to demonstrate his arguments from first principles or even support them with empirical evidence, if he's just kind of using nice chunky language, nice interesting language that's entertaining to read, to draw out these kind of elaborate and subtle strains of thought. You can suck people into that just based on the aesthetics of it. Like, there are certain writers who are just fun to read, even if they're not making really coherent points. And that's what I saw. And that is a tactic in terms of manipulation and not persuasion proper. I haven't interacted in his server very much. That's true. And I'd rather address it in a video because I have time for that. I don't have time to live in Discord, like apparently Imperius does. And let's see, anything else here? I did already respond to this, but I thought he had an interesting point, so I'll read it. Martin Webb. So this is something I said in the video, like libel laws are just spreading things that are known to be false empirically. Which authority gets to decide what is known to be false empirically? You should read these books, allow one to see that the present system for establishing truth has long since been hijacked by a cabal of highly nefarious characters. So hopefully you already recognize that's one of these tactics that I've highlighted, even in the video itself. And I'm just going to read my reply to it. Actually, no. I'll read a second comment. Guess which group has always lobbied hard for anti-libel legislation and anti-free speech laws? Why do you fear false accusations? Got something to hide? That's not even consistent. If I feared false accusations, it would be that I don't have that thing to hide that they are saying that I am. Like, it doesn't even make sense. Why do I fear false accusations? Because anyone can destroy my reputation based on lies. Like, I think that's rational to fear. That doesn't mean that I have something to hide. This makes no sense. You want the police to lock up anybody who slanders you? Your sniveling authoritarianism is giving me the heebie-jeebies. All right. Well, I was just agreeing with Kurt in saying that I think it's okay to prosecute libel and slander and stuff like that. When you're a public figure, it could potentially deprive you of income, right? If you're like a professor somewhere and somebody puts out all these lies or forges documents about you, that stuff is, I don't know, I see that is obviously not desirable in society. So my counter argument to this was I wasn't thinking in terms of an appeal to authority, and this is kind of begging the question. Like, when I say certain things can be known to be false empirically, I mean known according to right reason and good understanding, objectively false. Not that I have to appeal to some authority. The problem is that they're saying we ultimately will have to appeal to some authority. That's the structure of language for them, this kind of social structure of language and attentional disciplines and everything. No, I'm saying, like, we can recognize certain basic claims. Like, if I put out, I think, I'll just read the example. Yeah. If I claim that the U.S. Constitution contains a phrase that it doesn't contain, do you think we need an authority to appeal to in order to judge my claim false? Like, no. If you say something that is not the case, especially when it's a document, and that's where most of this actually applies. If you say a document contains a phrase that it doesn't contain, we can all check that. Any rational person can check that. If you're saying it's not possible to even arrive at that, like, really fundamental level of objective reality, like intersubjective verification, you got problems. Your whole worldview is going to collapse because it will basically have to rely on authority, and you inherently are rejecting the possibility of reason mediating disputes. So this is a question bag, and I don't know. It's hard to see why he wouldn't see through this, or why people don't see through this kind of, I don't know, just denial of reality, basically. There's a lot of stuff, so I'm going to try to get a little bit faster here. So, nice to see I inspired something from Ivan. I had mentioned more or less the same sort of argument against post-liberals in a comment on one of your previous videos. The first time I said it, the comment mysteriously vanished. There it goes. But remember repeating the argument in reply to something on your video. Yeah, Ivan's comments always disappear. I'm not sure what's up with that. I'm chronically lazy about these things and frankly just don't enjoy making videos all that much. And Ivan, if you haven't checked out his channel, he just made a video basically saying why he doesn't like making videos, and it was actually pretty high quality. So I'd recommend watching it. So thanks for doing my work for me. As blasé as it is to say, there really is nothing new under the sun. Okay, so that wasn't so much a point that I can respond to. He did make some interesting points, though. So, Ivan again, declarations of the impossibility of metaphysics are so bald-facedly stupid that it's genuinely difficult for me to understand how one can come to take them seriously, except through a kind of temporary and hence correctable intellectual solecism. The statement that, and this is important, the statement that metaphysics is impossible or meaningless is itself a metaphysical statement. It is a claim that some area of discourse called metaphysics does not contain meaningful statements. Hence, the statement implicitly contains views about the nature of meaning and about at least one realm of discourse. Hence, this claim is a claim about the nature of fundamental reality, because discourse is an element of that reality. But that's just what metaphysics is. It's the study of the most fundamental aspects of reality. It's literally impossible not to have a metaphysics. Not only is metaphysics not impossible, but it's literally impossible for it to be impossible. So yeah, big agree there. And I'm going to read Kurt's reply. The question is only whether metaphysics equals paradigm. As far as I know, it does or must. So to say there is no such thing as metaphysics is only to say that there is no such thing as relativism. I can't even follow this. I mean, does anyone else... I'm going to look at the live chat. Does anyone know what Kurt is trying to say here? In other words, there is either a most parsimonious paradigm for the description of reality or there isn't. Yeah, this to me seems that he's saying that there is objective metaphysics. If there's a most parsimonious paradigm or a best paradigm, then, and you equate metaphysics with paradigm, then you're saying there's a most correct metaphysics. So this doesn't make sense to me. Oh God. Reading Kurt again. I always love that. So, where was I? Yeah. Okay, so as far as I know, there is always and everywhere one most parsimonious and most complete paradigm, and that discipline we call science slowly converges on it. He seems to be a metaphysical realist here, and that this most parsimonious paradigm always and everywhere will provide decidability between less coherent, complete, and consistent paradigms. And the current limitation on progress in physical science is our present failure or challenge of creating a language, mathematics or logic, of geometric rather than point positional relations. Okay. The more obvious demands of protein modeling appear to be working towards a solution to that problem more so than physics. As far as I know, social science, cooperation, law, politics is solved because it's at human scale. As far as I know, economics remains unsolved and is a harder problem than the transition from positional curves to geometric shapes. If for no other reason, then we simply can't create consistent categories, so are stuck with Bayesian categorization, prediction, falsification, and adaptation. And I actually agree with this here with Kurt. We should be using Bayesian approaches where we assign probabilities, especially when it regards predictions of the future. Like regarding AI is going to come up in this stream, and we shouldn't say that it's definitely going to happen, like GoFi advanced AI is going to happen soon. We definitely shouldn't say it's not going to happen. Like there's no way. We should assign probabilities based on best evidence, but that's just, we'll get to that. Symmetries, providing the intermediary measures that the original data itself cannot. So I don't see the meaning of a discipline of metaphysics other than the rather obvious demarcation between deflationary, logical, operational, empirical, and science, and fictional, allegorical grammars, vocabularies. Oh, I don't know. I think I like the idea of deflation and constantly kind of reducing the amount of vagary in our language and referring more and more strictly as we approach these facets of, the actual reality as it is. But I think there are certain implications of that as we, like, when we have the best possible description of physical reality, when are we going to abandon certain other materialistic metaphysical presuppositions, or are we going to merge model with ontology? And I think that's what Chris Langan does. He merges the language that we use to model with the idea of the underlying substance itself, and that is, I think, a productive way to go in the future. So I think that's what metaphysics is really about, is clarifying what's that ontology, on the basis of this kind of process of constantly deflating the vagaries in our different models. So, and it certainly appears to do nothing more than that. The underlying conflict between the most parsimonious language launders information present in experience. And as we have seen, the empathic versus analytic difference in demand for priority on one hand and a desire for psychological sedation, suppression, mindfulness on the other. And from my tests over the past 2 years, in particular, that masculine versus feminine cognition appears to be impossible to resolve, which, as far as I know, is the source of the conflict of the present age and what's driving the incentive to separate or dominate. Yeah, so this is part of his narrative, that there are these kind of masculine and feminine ways of thinking, that there is a deflationary language, a kind of grammar that gives greater clarity, and then there's analogical, allegorical thinking, that operates based on free association and tends to be kind of co-opted by psychological demands. And that may be true in some sense, but I think this is a broader theme going on lately, that we have to reconcile creative and analytical thought. I say we ought to put reason first, but still give some kind of place to the feminine cognitive strategy or the creative cognitive strategy, right brain thinking. So anyway, I'm going to leave that open and see if anyone else can make something of that productive. But Kurt is just famously hard to penetrate, and not just because his ideas are sophisticated, and he does reference, contemporary science and stuff, but it's also his particular linguistic grammar is just hard to follow. Even though I've read it for years, I never quite the first time know what he means. And sometimes when I get into really analyzing it and asking him questions what he means, I can see something there. But let's move on. So if you think that the feds, this is a good point. Other people mentioned this point as well. Ivan, if you think that the feds are so powerful that they have everything scouted, have contingencies in place for any and every eventuality, have the ability to kill off or otherwise silence anyone who is a genuine threat to them, and can co-opt threatening messages or movement long before it comes to wide attention, then why are you even bothering to form an academy? If the elite really have the world absolutely by the balls in the way that you suggest, then what possible difference could such a thing make? The fact that you want to form institutions with which to build social capital, break off from the elite system, and presumably challenge it implies that you think the elite are beatable, at least if you play the long game. And if you think they are beatable, wouldn't it be better to change your emphasis when you discuss the extent of their power? Well, I want to make it clear, when I talk about their power to shape the discussion, their power to manipulate these movements that exist online, I am talking about what's happening on YouTube and Facebook and even Discord and these different platforms, because the technological infrastructure is just very amenable to feds getting in there and skewing with the heuristics and not heuristics, but the metrics, skewing with these things to push things in a given direction. They don't even have to all the time implant an actual agent to, like John Mark, if he is one, to actually make the arguments himself and enter the discourse. They just have to manipulate things by eliminating certain people, which they do, like James Alsop was eliminated in that way. They can eliminate people in this way, and they do it tactically, and they keep certain people. And I think they understand also that you have to have an outlet for this kind of thought, or else I don't know, maybe they'll be forced to go underground. But right now, we're not going underground in that we're not leaving their system where they can manipulate all these things. We're staying in their system, and therefore we have to actually create alternative systems, parallel institutions. And the reason for that is so that, I think I did actually reply to this. Yeah, the reason to do that is so that we can reach the truth. So, and I don't want to, challenge the system directly. I don't think I can beat them in a military contest at any point. I want a system within theirs that doesn't break their laws, that's as compatible as possible, that can survive systems collapse if that ever happens. That's one of my goals, and that's just a moral thing. I have a family. I want to have them living in the kind of world and social structure that is durable, that is, edifying to them. So anyway, that's basically why I say that they're so powerful, and yet I think this other thing can be done. I think things can be done in the real world, but they can't be done as easily online. And there are obviously problems where the feds could go and break up any school that you try to start. It's theoretically possible, but I think I addressed this in the comment as well, that what you want to do is spread and be notable as your community. Like the Amish, everyone knows about the Amish. Everyone basically likes the Amish, I think. And if they went in and started cracking down the Amish, this would be a big problem for a lot of people. And so you basically want to do that sort of thing, and also be able to live stream any Fed crackdown or whatever it is. And in worst case scenario, if you're kind of what's it called, Benedict option community fails in that sense, it might be fuel for more popular action, and that threat of fueling public reaction would be the disincentive to the feds for interfering. And so I think starting a school is not illegal, and I don't think also that the feds really do, they aren't doing anything illegal in eliminating James from YouTube, James Alsop. They just are, the private owners of YouTube get to do whatever they want with their platform. And that's true. That's the way the law is. Well, likewise, private citizens living in religious association or in educational societies or whatever it is, they have certain rights. And so if we don't exercise those rights in some capacity, then what's the point of having them? Okay, I think I lost audio for a second there. He's a globalist, sadly. I think all his talk about AI and transhumanism is just fear-mongering to convince people to bend the knee to a global regime. I heavily disagree with this idea of his. Yeah, it's not that I think AI and transhumanism is definitely going to threaten human existence, but it's possible, and I think we have to think about these. I think we have to, think about these possibilities and how we could potentially deal with them. If you don't have a global apparatus to deal with these sorts of things when they actually are a threat, if ever, then you can't scramble at the last minute. Once it becomes apparent that some form of dangerous transhumanism or AI is going to happen, you can't reorganize global law. You have to plan for it now. That's why international law is already being built. Space law is being built, even though there aren't so many applications. I mean, with satellites and stuff, these things do come up. But you have to build those legal structures now and surveillance structures now, or else when the threat comes, it'll be too late. And if it does. But this is that kind of Bayesian thinking that I was talking about. You don't really know what's going to happen in the future. You have to think what's possible, weigh those possibilities, and see what you can do to put yourself in a good situation no matter what happens. Yeah, I think he uses, so Big Boy Cleric, I think he uses the AI rhetoric way too often. It's nothing but an appeal to popularity, and that is nothing but, I don't know, a non-argument. So how is what I'm saying an appeal to popularity? These ideas about AI and transhumanism are popular with the public, but that doesn't mean that it's not possible, right? We have no AI coming, none. Maybe not in the short term, but are you saying it's not physically possible? I see this all the time where people reject the idea of AI, but they give no counter argument. Think about this. I mean, if the brain is a physical constitution, a physical system, and it produces consciousness and problem solving and intelligence, why can't we simulate this in some capacity? Why couldn't we start? This is called whole brain emulation. Nick Bostrom talks about this as one path to AI. Whole brain emulation, where you break down a human brain, like literally just when the person dies, you solidify it in a certain way and cut it up into a bunch of slices and model exactly what's going on at a very fine-grained scale. That just requires certain technology that we don't have in terms of imaging and modeling the physical structure of the brain. But once we can get a very good model of the physical structure, we can emulate different processes that occur in the brain. And I mean, think about like, why does a computer work? Because of the logic gates that operate underlying, or rather on top of the physical hardware. So it's not necessarily that, you know, neurons are magic and special in their substance. It may be the accident, in terms of Aristotelian substance and accident. It may be the accident of the brain that consciousness is and that intelligence is. And if we can therefore model the physical brain, whole brain emulation, and understand what the accidents are underlying that system, then if we can replicate them and, you know, run them digitally, why couldn't that lead to why could that not lead to artificial intelligence? There's no argument to that. I haven't seen people make arguments against it. They just flatly assert it's not possible. And are you saying never? Because we have to think way down the line, not just like in the next 50 years, but in the next few centuries. If it's possible 200 years from now, and we don't plan according to that possibility, then when it happens, like Nick Bostrom and other people talk about all the possible dangers of AI if we don't prepare for it carefully. Like the idea that, okay, so you have this super intelligent thing that you create, you can tell it to, say you want it to optimize the process of making paper clips at a paperclip factory. Well, it doesn't have common sense necessarily, it just has intense problem solving, and it doesn't have the values that we do. It just has problem solving. So if you say solve for X, which is paper clips, then what it might do is turn the entire universe into a paperclip factory, obliterating all life. And like that's the kind of absurd possibilities that could come out of AI. And we have to plan for it now. Transhumanism and human machine interfaces are coming. Yeah. And we have actual products available to the public now based on this technology. AI, nothing. Again, people don't make arguments here. Refined machine learning algorithms, sure, but nothing approaching consciousness. Ivan, I completely agree with you. GoFi is BS. Connectionist architecture, I think he mentions, is more promising now than... But the thing with good old-fashioned artificial intelligence is that you have these kind of specialized machines, specialized artificial intelligences that can... whatever particular kind of problem you're looking to solve, say you're trading stocks, we can now trade stocks much, much better than we could before. We can do every specific task much better. So maybe we can't get a global, traditional GoFi architecture, artificial intelligence, but maybe we can have enough modular GoFi pieces that it doesn't really matter ultimately. We can have transhumanists with their brain interfaces where they have access to all these modular machines very quickly, and then we have the machines to do the calculations. So I don't see that's going to lead to a very high level intelligence, superhuman intelligence, regardless of whether traditional GoFi stuff is going to work. And it might one day too. Its proponents and practitioners have been issuing grandiose proclamations. So I'm trying to show you guys the right section, but in issuing grandiose proclamations and predictions that have failed to come to pass since the late 60s. At what point does it become obvious that these people are just lying and exaggerating things so they can continue to secure government grant money? Well, just because they have predicted certain things and they haven't come to pass for X amount of time doesn't mean that it's not possible. And it's the possibility that really matters, not the individual practitioners. It's long since time that we put this nonsense to bed. No, if it's possible, you got to think about the possibility. Because the thing about GoFi is that just one programmer potentially could create it, right? Purely in terms of software. Whereas connectionist architecture involves more of this hardware aspect of things, and you would need a more concerted, high budget project to create these innovations. With GoFi, theoretically, one person could do it, and so if everyone stops thinking about it, and one guy unsupervised comes out with it, are you saying it's really not possible? Why do you say it's impossible? That's the stretch that I just don't understand, and it seems illogical to me. You can't infer the impossibility of something based on the fact that it hasn't happened or that it's not likely to happen soon. It's one of the ironies of history that Doug Engelbart's original vision of augmenting human intelligence with technology will be the one that wins out, rather than the opposing MIT vision of AI. Never forget that people laughed at Engelbart and that he fought a lonely battle in the 50s and 60s to develop his projects. I have read about this. Yeah, I mean, I think if what we're going to see with AI is going to come out of connectionist stuff, fundamentally, it comes down to this. Either Erval really thinks that the elite are a quasi-omnipotent cabal who have everything scouted, or he doesn't. Right, I'm saying they have everything scouted here. They can control these conversations. And the obvious question is, why am I still here? Well, because I have like 3,000 subs and like I average maybe 700, 800 views a video. And that's only lately because I've been stirring up drama. Like people... I don't think the feds are actually watching my videos, besides Kurt, evidently. But the feds aren't really watching my videos because I can't make an impact right now. And maybe if I grew, they would worry about me. Now, the way they use their algorithms is they look for these particular words that people use. And if there's something that triggers, like if this fits into a pattern, then they'll investigate it. But I don't think they really have people watching everyone. And I don't know, maybe I just don't pose enough of a threat to them. And I'm saying I'm not going to threaten them. I'm not going to fight them. I just want to do what they've said is legal. Right? Anyway, so if he does, then there's no reason to start an academy. We've already dealt with this argument. I have my own views on the subject, but I'm not going to pretend that we're up against unbeatable supermen. Hubris, arrogance, and outright stupidity play a larger role in history than many are comfortable admitting. It's also obvious that the elite are terrified by the internet and what it represents. I don't think so. I think the internet is great for them. But like some of the stuff that Ivan has talked about in terms of like Skycoin or other, blockchain-based internet architecture alternatives, like maybe that could be a threat to them, but not the internet as it currently exists. Why do they think they're so eager to Dongarm Facebook and Google into policing content to an even greater extent than they already are? If you think it's so bad the right can have a fair amount of access to the public square, then I have a bridge to sell you. Yeah, well, I mean, Facebook and Google started out of this Stanford project developing a search algorithm, right? It was James Corbett covered this in a video from probably a couple months ago. But it was tied to the feds from the beginning, Google was. And Facebook, the CIA, or rather FBI has worked with Facebook, COINTELPRO, just look into that. I mean, this is confirmed stuff. As a brief aside, there's nothing more idiotic and patently self-destructive. The implication there is if they're designing the systems, they're working, intelligence agencies are working with these systems, you have to assume they have some power to shape discourse, and therefore we can't trust in these mass movements that arise here. And also, just think about like the IQ distribution. We shouldn't care so much about what ideas are popular. We should care more about the truth. And so people who use instrumental language to, build up these followings and stuff like that, they're going to be outcompeted by the feds. Whereas the feds don't necessarily have this kind of philosophical passion where they could get to a true worldview. If through this kind of evolutionary process of arguing with one another, we do arrive at a true worldview, then one great book that sets out a new paradigm, not just for philosophy and politics, but for science as well, like a world-changing, paradigm-changing book could spread, and that could have a big impact. but you don't need a populist internet movement for that. You don't need something like the alt-right. Really, the alt-right would be counterproductive to that aim. You need to get people who are willing to be rational and really get into the very specific elements of arguments and decide which theories are best and which predictions are best. And also not to make that a black or white thing, but to use Bayesian approaches, probabilistic modeling. As a brief aside, there is nothing more idiotic and patently self-destructive if you oppose the regnant narratives in any serious way than to clamor for the government to break up the tech monopolies. If you have dissonant politics, then without a free and open internet, you are nothing. And the only way to have a free and open internet is to ensure that no single organization, including the government, can ever control it or direct it. And I think what this is missing is that the tech monopolies are already controlled by the government. They are monopolies because of government interference. That's why they're monopolies. The internet has fundamentally changed reality. It has decentralized information to an incredible degree and made it impossible for the elite to control its flow. I think that's not true. I think that's totally not true. It has centralized. I mean, the internet has a few sites that everyone goes on, and the feds are involved with all the people running these sites. Or at least the leaders of these sites have ideologies, worldviews compatible with the feds or with the globalists more generally, and they control their platforms. They control the flows of traffic on their platforms. It's only a few platforms we're talking about. Since politics is fundamentally based on the ability to manufacture lies and illusions with which to control a population, this poses a threat not only to the current globalist elite, but to every conceivable elite. Yeah, I think maybe some blockchain internet architecture could pose a threat where it can't be centrally controlled. But even then, they might find a way mimetically to control the discourse. I think the conception of politics that I want to believe in as not inherently just manipulative and lying and creating illusions is organizing based on what we take to be rationally the best course of action. Like if we take moral realism and take empirical and rational analysis of the world, good science, then we can discover the best courses of action. And part of that will be acknowledging the imperfect nature of our knowledge and using probabilistic modeling in creating that kind of what should we do collectively. I think that kind of politics, good faith, rational politics as a mode of cooperation is possible. If you advocate its control or regulation in any way, you're ultimately collaborating in your own enslavement. I think that's just not true. Because if a current iteration of the internet prevents your kind of sky coin alternative from coming to fruition, then, I think breaking up the current tech monopolies and not necessarily, you'd have to use government power, but my point is government power built these monopolies up. And if those monopolies prevent authentic alternatives from emerging, then that's going to be a problem. So that's why Ivan he has always so much to say, and I recommend his channel, but it can get a little bit frustrating just going through so much stuff every time. That's why I think that people like Bill Ottman, creator of Minds, Munim Ali, creator of Blockstack and Synth, co-founder of Skycoin, and Cody Wilson, inventor of a 3D printed gun, are ultimately going to be much more historically significant. So the rest of this, he's just saying that new technologies can produce new kinds of platforms and new political exigencies that'll have a larger impact. I agree with this. This is compatible with what I want to do. He wants to develop these technologies because he's a programmer. I want to develop these technologies, and I don't want just to trust the nerds to do it. I want a broader school where there's also philosophy and arts too. When I say I want a school, I want a music department, I want visual arts, I want theater, I want all of that stuff. I want to make movies like that. Everything, there's an aspect to it in education, and I think that kind of well-balanced right brain and left brain institution would have a better chance actually of developing these new kinds of technologies that could change the game in a fundamental way. But the only way that I see to really do it is to get these people together living in a very different way and not just kind of the how should I put it, the kind of bohemian tech entrepreneur lifestyle. Okay, Hector. So I'm broadly sympathetic to your critique of, and you've made me rethink quite a bit about Nietzsche and post-structuralism, but I'm less sold on the consequences of these divergent schools. A quick look at Murray's human accomplishment chart shows that Germans and French were just about as copious of scientific thinkers and inventors as the British. Yeah, when I said analytic, I'm not just talking about the British ethnically. And also, you have to look at Murray's graphs. Are they talking about the relevant time frame? Like during the time when postmodernism was popular on the continent, during that time, was the continent as productive as America, which was analytic, and Britain? I don't think so, because I think America had the lead in patents by far. I also think that at this point, it's pretty clear that the English are the most deracinated people in the world. Yeah, I'm not glorifying the English, for sure. By far the most self-hating and apologetic people I have met are the English, and this is true even when they are expatriates or part of the diaspora. Yeah, so he's making good points. Don't worship the Anglos. Yeah, okay. Moving on, I have like maybe an hour left, and I think I'll get through it before then. Yeah, he's reinforcing my argument. If you're a moral nihilist, how can I really cooperate with you? It doesn't make sense, because you can't hold yourself accountable to anything beyond what you prefer at this moment. If your preference changes and there's no objective right or wrong outside of your preference, then why won't you just go with your preference in the future? And if you say rational self-interest, I think that's invoking a kind of moral realism, because you're saying there's such a thing as objective interest outside of your current preference. And maybe your preference is built into that, right? Maybe in order to understand what's good for you, you have to know how preference operates psychologically. But liberal egalitarian fallacy, click accept. Hierarchical structures inherent from nature, like tribal formation and family formation, do not show IQ grading of authority as an evolutionary outcome. The correct identification of the sacred, be it intuitive or cerebral, leads to flourishing if we assume submission of the group, for instance, but flourishing is contingent also on group cohesion. I think the high IQ people do end up being leaders of traditional societies. Maybe not the highest in IQ in terms of how we understand it, but high quality people. And don't think that I'm saying, we should literally put the highest IQ guy in charge. That's really not my position. And the idea is that there's a class of people who are capable of behaving rationally, and this should be something. Think of how the mafia works. You have all the mob bosses, they get together. They don't have one leader in front of all of them. They have like a code of ethics, a way that they get together. And by analogy, for rational people, we're going to have certain standards for discourse. If you make a point, we have an obligation to respond to it or maybe accept your proposal, these sorts of debate etiquette things. And the mob acts similarly with different etiquette, and then they go back and each have their own authoritarian institution, which is built more in instrumental terms. So what I'm talking about is a dualism of authoritarian structures in certain regards and egalitarian rational structures in others. The correct identification of the sacred, be it intuitive or cerebral, leads to flourishing, and you have to define flourishing there. That's like a code word for if you're a moral nihilist, but you don't want to say leads to the good. The sacred leads to flourishing if we assume submission of the group, for instance, but flourishing is contingent also on group cohesion. correct identification of the sacred. I think this is where you have to get into questioning the presuppositions of the post-liberal people. The sacred, the notion of the sacred. I mean, I agree, though, that you do have to understand what the sacred really is, but my definition will likely be pretty different from their GA-derived concept of the sacred. As kind of like, think that animal that no one's allowed to eat, that you like decide, I forbear from my consumption, and this gesture towards that thing that is forbidden. That's the kind of Hebrew concept of the sacred as well. But I think that's not the only concept of the sacred. But anyway, there's just not enough here to go on, ultimately. Yeah. And then here's an interesting point. Neo-reaction is not compatible with liberalism. Liberalism is not free markets. Liberals believe in natural rights. We do not. Liberalism did not invent markets and commodities. No, it didn't. But liberal thinkers invented the kind of market philosophy, the free market philosophy of capitalism. And so when I say that the neo-reaction, creating communities, this kind of corporatist, formalistic structure is compatible with liberalism, I mean that it operates in a market context, and it's like you could do it within the neoliberal world order that we currently have. So that's more what I meant, not that they would ideologically call themselves liberals. And by the way, natural rights, I've recently decided that I can defend the idea of natural rights. If states can establish legal rights, then nature can establish natural rights by analogy, because you have, in the case of the state, you have the sovereign, you have the laws that are created, and part of the laws are the establishing of rights, and if someone infringes on your right, they're punished by the state. Now, by analogy, God creates natural law, and in that natural law, it may be that there are certain ways that you treat individuals based on their context that if you violate, you will be karmically punished. I will elaborate that argument in the future, but I think I can actually defend natural rights. Reactionaries are not against rights and freedoms. What we are against is the notion that you are entitled to them. Right, well, so what I'm saying is I guess you would be entitled to them in that they are naturally good. Robert Filmer believed that a good king gives people liberties. Yeah, but ultimately, if you're saying, like, what's the basis of saying that they're a good king if the natural rights aren't really inherent? If you're saying it's at the discretion of the king, I don't know. There's, again, not enough to go on here, really. Yep. All right. Sorry if this is a little slow. I'm just trying to get through these because, as I said in the beginning, I don't have time to actually do all of this. Oh, Imperius is in the chat, somebody says. Did he actually... Yeah, I'll get to that. I have to get to the rest of these first. You know what? Let's take a break from this. I'll go now to the current comments. So let me look at these. Oh God, I may have put way too much on my plate. This is kind of a lot to do right now, and I have about 30 to 45 more minutes. I'm just gonna, I guess, see what Imperius has said because I am directly targeting him. And Admiral Murat, though, first. So the idea, scrolling back up in the chat, if you can find it, Admiral Murat, the idea that post-liberal is opposed to free speech is the sense of finding truth and reason is outright wrong. Also, we take to heart your ideas concerning creating a grid, not going off the grid. Well, I'm glad that you agree with those ideas. When you say that it's not opposed to free speech in the sense of finding truth and reason, why is it wrong? Because as I see it, the theory of language that you have implies that language can't actually find the truth ultimately. And when I've spoken with your guys, like several people, they've denied the possibility of objective absolute truth. And also, if you're a nominalist, how can you have a conception that there is like one valid reason? Because when, like Joel Davis has talked about reason in terms of a hypostasization of a concept, in a hypostasis is the idea that there's some substance underlying the thing you're talking about. So if you're saying reason is erroneously hypostasized, what you're saying is that there's no substance to reason. Reason isn't a thing. It's a concept derived from something else, and we falsely hypostasize it. But I don't think so. So anyway, the impressions that I've gotten from some of the writings and some of the people I've talked to in post-liberalism seem to imply that they are objecting to the possibility of finding absolute truth. So anyway, there are many great strides towards community development and face-to-face interaction. I'm sure that you would support such cooperation due to the fact that it provides the actual needs of the people. I will always appreciate your work and criticism. If there ever is a constructed education institution, there will always be a place for you. Blessings be upon you and your family. Okay. All right. So Imperius. The only response I got from him was, Gans is no philosopher. When I asked him if he could elaborate, he wouldn't. That was quite a while back. What I was saying was the article that Imperius sent me about, by Gans, about Platonism didn't actually argue the theory of forms. It presupposed that the forms didn't exist. I would have to open up that article and argue with it specifically, but there wasn't any philosophical argumentation going on. He constructed a narrative of like basically a genealogy of how Platonic thinking emerged, but that doesn't invalidate it. It's like Nietzsche's genealogy of morals doesn't invalidate the validity of traditional moral structures. So I did elaborate. He's misstating the case. No, I said why I disagreed, or why I thought that Gans was not a philosopher. Is he claiming that Gans is a philosopher? Also, weren't you gonna unsubscribe, Imperius? God help Eric do anything organizationally with so immature of people. Yeah, I'm not reading the rest of the chat, so I don't know. If Kurt wants to talk to us, he should critique that article in great detail. See you. If he's talking about that article about Platonism, I could do that. I think what he's not seeing, and this is not his fault if this is what's going on, but a lot of people don't realize when a long string of narrative is packed with assertions. Because it is hard. Basically, you have to change the way that you read in order to analyze critically, because what people will do is they'll just kind of keep on reading quickly, accepting, yeah, that seems true, but they're not stopping at every proposition and really thinking about it and thinking, wait a second, where is he getting that claim from? What's the ground of this claim? And that's reason in essence. There has to be a reason for each claim. What is the ground of that claim? So I could do that. I might do that one day. All right, so that was it with Imperius. Really not too much there. And getting back to this, let's see. Yeah, so I did have a discussion with Different T. The people who were there, he's a nice guy. We had an interesting discussion. He seemed to agree with me ultimately on most of this, like moral realism. The prospect was to argue moral realism with him. It ended up that he wasn't a moral nihilist through his definition. We ended up arguing about the definition of sovereignty, a couple other things. But thank you, Different T, if you see this, for talking with me. And then Dewspook, I have to respect Dewspook for engaging with me early on. When I used to complain that people didn't engage with my metaphysical arguments way back in the beginning, in like 2013 and stuff. But Dewspook would. And I couldn't always comprehend exactly what he was getting at because his language is not conventional in a lot of ways, and it's actually gotten better. It used to be very avant-garde, very like the medium was the message, the way he was communicating it was wrapped up in what he was trying to get at. But now it's a little bit more rational. So the adherence to Locke now in your mind of finding your preferred thought. Libertarianism is in the neo-reactionaries 5 to 10 years ago. Perhaps your reference is as some pocketed group. Yes, this was not all the neo-reactionaries, but there were people. I saw at least one website where people were talking about how you could design these kind of smart cities of the future, and that this would be a new kind of political paradigm. That's that kind of libertarian-friendly application of formalism. And I think the basic concept in principle was that if you have these kind of corporate governments, like, city-states managed by a corporation, then they would effectively own the human capital of the city. They would own the people there. So that's kind of the edgy reactionary part of the philosophy. But anyway, I did see these people maybe 5 years ago, not 10. But the notion that a mere 10 years ago some neoliberal view overlay upon market capitalism seems absurd, totally out of historical bounds. Perhaps look at 1450 Netherlands and the liberal mindset, if you must appeal and apply the word liberal or liberalism at all. Okay. The Continental School sought fame. Yeah, Foucault sought fame. Derrida sought fame. I don't know all that much about the biography of Deleuze, but I see this kind of factor going on in people who follow continental philosophy as well. They seem less concerned at arriving at a comprehensive understanding of the world than they do at stringing together interesting narratives and getting notoriety. That's just my impression. Other people have that opinion as well and are mere degenerates. I'm saying it was full of degenerates, not that all of them were degenerates. Which of these continentals or continentalists are you quoting? I said like Foucault and Derrida are the big examples of that kind of immorality. I assume none particular. Some have had children and families and lived conservative lives in all outer respects. Yeah, some. Seems to me, Erval, that you are just spitting neo-modern contemporary talking points. It is as if you are a boxer upset that you have a war against a WWF wrestler and find their method as instrumental to be unfair. Well, if I was a boxer and a WWF wrestler came in with a chair and did the backflip stuff and like had a friend come out of the audience, and like that would be a problem, right? That would be a problem. So I'm assuming that there is this kind of rational discourse where we can all try to arrive at the truth together. And I don't just assume it. I would make arguments for why that's the case, why language can actually reach metaphysical truth, why it's possible in principle. I've made those arguments elsewhere. I will make them again. But ultimately, I'm going to really quick argue for it. The idea is that the syntax of language has to be related to the underlying syntax of reality, because through syndiphonesis, all syntaxes have to be related somehow. If they adhere in a single existential field, if they coexist, there's something connecting the syntax of language to the syntax of the brain, and the neurological cognitive syntax to the perceptual world and to the underlying physical processes. They all have to have some fundamental similarity of structure, and that's why mathematics applies to things in the external world. Jay Dyer makes these arguments too. These arguments are out there. Like, math works, reason works because reality actually does conform to it. Not necessarily in every respect, in every formalism of logic, but they share a fundamental syntax. And I think the best demonstration, you'd have to look to Chris Langan's principle of syndiphonesis. And Heraclitus had the same observation, that any two things, if they coexist, must exist within a common kind of syntactic medium, where the elements that compose these two structures have meaning. They have certain ways that they operate, right? Like if you say a hydrogen atom exists and a helium atom exists, these are intelligible structures because things like electromagnetism, the nuclear weak force, strong force, these elements, gravity, these things apply to these two different structures, and that's why we can recognize them both, because they're operating according to the same rules. It's like you can see there's a basketball game when there are two basketball players. The players are different, but they're in the same game. You can't perceive a basketball player and a chess player in the same game because they can't play the same game, right? But anytime there's a similar game, the same game exists, there will be some similarity of the operating forces underlying the structuring of the two factors. And that example with the chess player and the basketball player does not delegitimize syndiphonesis. That says that you have to look to a more fundamental syntax than that particular game. It's not always the immediate syntax underneath it. You might have to go down. Syndiphonetic regression is a process where you get to the most fundamental syntactic structures of any of these physical systems or mental systems. And you will have a convergence at some point in that regression. So that's the argument for why reason can actually work, why we can use linguistic syntax to mirror the syntax of the real world. And so the WWF wrestler example, that's like, I'm assuming there's truth. If somebody comes in staging a performance and saying there's no truth, then I can't argue with them. So I'm going to object to that, yeah. And then you shore up to true political principles, eschew absolutism, while hypocritically approximating an absolute. Yeah, absolutism, I'm not talking about like there can't be absolute truth. I'm talking about you don't want power to be absolute because it's self-justifying. That's kind of the idea, really, fundamentally with neo-absolutism, that power exerts itself, the center emerges in an obvious way, and we don't justify how that happens or why that happens or how it should happen. It simply is a factor of life. Power exerts itself and is, in a sense, absolute. And by recognizing that and not trying to constrain the central power by some system of rights or constitution or something like that, but by just a formalist explication of the proper relations of the different classes in society, or not proper relations, but the inherent interests that exist across society, then we can structure these different classes in a way that facilitates stability on the one hand, and also, prosperity and mutual goodwill and things like that. But all of that stuff is going to be ad hoc in their system because they're not moral realists. So why should we organize society in this way? You're just going to have to appeal to because we think you want to live this way. And enough people will that method of persuasion works, but it's not really persuasion. It's just you have a sympathetic resonance with my aesthetic ideal, so you're going to fall in line with me. But the problem with that way of looking at things is that you can't get to fundamental issues in a rational way because you're not using rational principles to justify your vision of the world. I'm not certain you have upped your game lately, but at least you do get some good traction per each video. You attract people based on your tempered tone, I believe, a bit more than your doubling down insistences of the rational and the truth, and the case and the proper rules of thinking, and the supposed insistence that of others of different mindscapes than your own are bad actors or unreasonable interlocutors. I'm not saying they're bad. Yeah, I guess I am saying they're bad actors. But I don't just want to assert that. My idea is that if you can't argue with me, if you won't argue with me, if you say that rational argumentation is not possible ultimately, that putting on interpretive dance instead of counter arguing my point is just as valid, that's where we run into a problem. And I will call that bad faith argumentation, because it's a refusal to engage according to the principle that we could in theory arrive at some actual truth of the case. So I'm not going to restate all of that, but the problem pragmatically is that how do we reach consensus? How do we reach a shared conception unless you assume this? So people who can't engage in that way only have recourse to manipulating through other means instrumentalization of language, which I've said before has its place. I'm not an absolutist in saying everything has to be that way and not the other. I'm saying I want to find people to cooperate with who are rational, because in principle, a rational group of people can form a very large structure where each of them are tied to their own kind of absolutist structures as well. You can use interpretive dance in some contexts. Like, I would have a place for interpretive dance in my school. Maybe not. Maybe I would stick to ballet, honestly, by my aesthetics, but in principle. But it's about a hierarchy of this. This is Plato's notion of the hierarchy of the soul. Reason goes on top. Is this just a ref calling foul to a rule system, to the court that they believe that they and their opponents must both be sharing to exchange upon? Namely, the same game with each other. Yeah, right. But your language, I mean, it is that in a sense, but your language trivializes the notion that I'm really putting forward, that there is an objective reality. There's a real fact of the case, the fact of the matter. And if someone's engaging in a way that will prevent us structurally from arriving at consensus of that, then they're not playing my game in a sense. But it's not just some game. It's the truth. And seeking the truth is not the same as just any other game. It's transcendent. It escapes any game framework. The truth is transcendent over any game. There's always truths about games, but any one game is limited. The truth is not limited. As if formalism is idealized as best for what is most correct, when the same game is obviously not being played, nor could it really. Yeah, and you're saying like, oh, well, we can just play these other games and they're equally legitimate. But that's presupposing that you're right in your worldview. I don't think you can play these other games linguistically equally. I think they all have to be subordinate and are to reason. The logical structure of language is subordinated to the rational structure of the universe by necessity, not by your discretion or what game you want to play. It's not what game you want to play. It's what's actually true. As if I already read that. Includes the migration of personalized exceptions to a discrete definition of the court game, formal game. It is why courts have judges whom supposedly weigh true evidences and guide motions, but see a legal judge on a chessboard or basketball court, and they are lesser than sophomoric. So I did read this comment before doing this, and that's, I guess, where I came up with the chess and basketball. I didn't realize that, though, so that's interesting. Consider arriving at not truth per se in the abstract, but at the least wrong. And I do. Yeah, this is part of the Bayesian approach to hypotheses, and also the Popperian epistemological view, where you have a rationale for your view. Let's test it against the other rationales that are offered and see which one wins out. And we do test according to parsimony and according to correspondence, internal consistence, a lot of the stuff that Doolittle talks about, right? Like this is this kind of least wrong thing. I've talked about points just like this many times. The 180 IQ guy might prefer to see the people of an island run quite a bit amok in an observation of auto-cohesion. Yeah, IQ alone is not sufficient to have somebody be the charismatic leader, but like, you know, if you have one guy who's just of a different, say you had a race of gods just literally come to the earth, and they weren't just smarter in IQ terms, but they were more moral, they were closer to the truth overall. That's what I was really getting at, not the IQ score in particular, but the idea that if someone is really just more connected to reality holistically, then they should be set in charge of people who are substantially less than that, like this kind of race of gods example, which in a way is kind of Nietzschean. Who knows? But you have an appeal to IQ as the metric for hierarchical domination. Yeah, it's not just, I used IQ because it was facile, it came to mind, so that's why I said the IQ thing. And then where is Erval on this island? Bereft of the desired order, which his supposed 140 IQ finds absent. Yeah, I've said publicly in the past, I scored 143 on the general score on my ASVAB, and that used to be used like an IQ test. I don't know if the general score on the ASVAB equates exactly. I might want to get an IQ test, like a professional one in the future, but that's about right. Glassware, pottery, the person's relationships to objects are the aesthetics of the inventions of the continentalists these low-level practical technologies. Not sure what you mean there. True political positions, as if true in this case isn't by virtue of being true, mutating. Okay. It would have to be true that it mutates too. So I don't know why you object to there being a true political position, even if it's within a context. I say in this video, everything, or no, the last video, maybe this video, everything has a context. And so a political position saying we ought to do this, it's saying we ought to do this, not this ought to be done universally in all contexts. So mutation is an aspect of things, meaning that people and societies are adjusting at different technologies at different rates. So it seems that absolutism is, in my opinion, where you believe a political truth to lay. I don't know exactly what he means by that. The notion that this Kurt Doolittle guy is such a central antagonist to your world, and in conjunction, you actually believe that his movement will gain enough momentum to destabilize the world. It is as if you have become emotionalized by entertaining Doolittle's epistemology. It's a similar neuroticism to my old war with Emendum. I once commented on one of Doolittle's threads, which should, I believe, underscore a huge gap in one of his fundamental axioms. I wouldn't sweat the guy. Yeah, I mean, I think people underestimate Kurt. I respect Kurt. I think he's not all bad. You know, I still think he's a Fed. But as a thinker, if anything, this is how I think it basically went. Kurt worked for the State Department in the past. This is what he told me, right? He worked for the State Department. He wrote up plans to destabilize governments. He did these things for them. And in retirement, basically, I think he said, like, I want free reign to run this system that I've been working on. I think there is a passion. Kurt couldn't have an output like he has unless there was a real passion. So what I think happened is he went to the State Department or whoever. Can I have free reign to try this thing, right? And that worked with the feds because that allows them a controlled opposition. And it's their guy at the center of it. And so they just inherently have more control. And so maybe they said, sure, go nuts. And there are cases where they'll have like intelligent, like deep, deep cover agents where you don't contact them for security purposes. And so Kurt could be something like that, but maybe he is really like putting forward his philosophy. That's why I engage with his philosophy in good faith. I do address his arguments that he actually makes, and I point to what I think is deficient in it. Okay, so, and I'd quit on the continental postmodernists, as you seem to find these deframing language instrumentalists, as you put it, as a huge non-coherent waste of time. Some people occupy their time and energy cleaning up messes, studying the mess with a different virtue to clean up the world. I mean, I don't harp on them all that much. I'm really more interested in putting forward my own positive ideas. I mean, if you look at most of my videos, I'm coming up with some hypothesis, and sharing it. I don't really give a lot of attention to the postmodernists. Please tell us, Airfall, whom will you be voting for? Seriously, who aligns most correctly with your view? Chris Langan. Although he's not running for office. Nobody who's running for office aligns with my view. Nick Fuentes is the only guy who has a public platform that's compatible with what I want to do. Best case scenario, Nick's movement rises up, controls the GOP, gives us some time where there's at least like somebody fighting for traditional structures, in various ways in the US. This is the kind of platform where people will have the ideas that I think are closer to the truth and not so far as you find in liberal egalitarianism, racial egalitarianism, things like that. So he's right on certain issues. He's going to spread those true ideas, build a large movement about that. And what that'll create is people who then will look for truth in other regards. And so this is why he's who I support. Nick Fuentes is who I support at a popular level. He's the only guy with the talent. And nobody who's like a mainstream figure do I feel the same way about. Pat Buchanan. And I liked Pat before Nick was streaming. I liked Pat Buchanan, I don't know, 5, 6 years ago. The nerve that you believe that you have come to what others would come to if they were reading philosophy correctly is a type of ego narcissism. No. If I believe that I'm right, that's narcissism, then no one can believe that they're right. And I'm not saying I'm certain that I'm right. I'm saying this is my belief. And also the idea in principle that I made in the argument or in the video was that if there is a truth, then people who earnestly seek the truth should converge on it and arrive at something like a perennialism, so a philosophy that keeps popping up over and over all over the place. I think that's what you would see if there is a truth. And I think that's what you do see, and I think it's perennialism. And that's my hypothesis, that's my belief. And it doesn't make me a narcissist. It makes me sincere in my convictions. Do you not believe what you believe? It's contradictory. And this is based on your read of the past, not upon your speculation and description projected towards the future. Oh, I don't know. I just think that you live in the mind or one who worries about an existential cautionary tale. This worry, concern, and projection is heavily localized in the epistemic domain opposed to an ontological domain. It is masculine to hold your being in the head crown chakras where the pulse is of a lower chakra. Sometimes you just enter a flow state with Mike and you don't even know. You're just like, all right, I'm with you, I guess. I believe that you are just echoing yourself now, denoting the dominance of the system when Doolittle's notions are a perceived threat to it, and then in the next moment, squeaking to yourselves and others in contra that one must go build their own grid and multiply. Yeah, I think he's pointing out the same kind of like, well, if you think they're so powerful, why do you think you can succeed in building an alternative system? I already addressed that. So the adherence, and even if it's not, yeah, sorry about that. I have problems with my mic because I'm waving my hand over here and then I knock the cord. Anyway, but this might be an application of the least wrong principle, where if this is the best shot, even if it's unlikely, if my Bayesian analysis says it's unlikely, then I should go for it. The adherence to the traditional logical forms and structures at you denounce instrumental language play echoes your abandonment of vocationalizing your musical training, all to worry and concern and lumber towards an ideal, which is to buy land, go off grid, and grow a community which is at disjunct from currently established legal codices. In a sense, it is, in that it's becoming harder and harder legally to do this, but it's still legal. And typically, when you establish something like a community or like even just buildings, if the laws change, what exists now gets grandfathered in most cases, which is why it's kind of urgent actually to do this sooner than later. It's not illegal. This ongoing drive to get people to submit, and I worked for Falun Gong, I worked for Shen Yun. I know they have a big complex in the Catskills. They live like this. People are able to live like this. The ongoing drive to get people to submit and declare that others are suspicious is suspicious in its own right. I think, I want to get people to submit to reason, and I want people to be rationally suspicious if people use bad debate tactics. I don't see why that should be suspicious in its own right. How are you not, and I'm not saying you should uncritically accept what I'm saying. I'm saying you should critically analyze what everyone says and therefore submit to reason and hold others in suspect, or rather hold others suspect when they don't provide reasons for their claims, but rather, refer to a reading list or one of these other tactics. How are you supposed to argue with the others of a different ilk, your grappler against the romantic boxer? Well, you have to be able to hold the intellectual exchange. Yeah, I agree with that. Unfortunately for me, I have been slotted as the crazy guy on the hill when I'm nothing but. Although you might simply coin others or myself as bad faith agent. I don't think Mike is a bad faith agent. If you think you need to recognize the cliff, or I think you need to recognize the cliff, the punctuated disjuncts among others, you seem as if you need to consider the field of diplomats. Well, I don't know. I think we're young guys, and this is kind of the way men operate, is you call someone out or you make fun of someone or you do something more like that. And I do think that's being diplomatic in certain respects. And I was very diplomatic with these guys despite my reservations, when I first started dealing with them. And I give people the benefit of the doubt until I think I understand basically that I disagree with something fundamental in what they're doing, and then I will call that out and hope to bring it to the fore. And I made that last video to get public discussion going. And like challenging Joel to a fight or Imperius, I think that's just funny. I don't know. I think it's like you have to take life with a little levity. Like you have to take your arguments seriously, but also in the midst of that, like recognize that it is just this life. Like look up at the stars and think about how vast the cosmos is. Like ultimately, really, this Earth, its fate, your fate, even like there's a bigger process that we're a part of. And so, in a way, people do write their lives as a comedy. Some people are not recognizing this, and so recognizing the comedic aspect of a life is a way to separate yourself or detach from the suffering that comes from engaging too directly in it. Not to say that you should ignore the issues. You should take your conviction seriously, get in character in essence, but ultimately realize there is a kind of, flippancy. The severity and flippancy of life need to coexist without injuring each other. You have to have this kind of elevated detachment, as in Hinduism, but also sincerely do whatever you're doing. I do like your view on the afterlife as an echo into the afterlife and the wanting to keep closer to the iron rod in Mormon theology. Forgive those whom have sinned. Okay, yes, you do, yet you insist that those who tail off into a radius of the irrational are what? To be torn to shreds in the afterlife, even though a very aged person persists with a more tattered actual being than that? Yeah, I think the long-term trend of irrational minds is to degrade, because reason is what holds the mind together. Adherence with reason is how your body was built. It's how you evolved. Your ancestors acted in accordance with empirical reality, in accordance with the rational structure of reality. Therefore, they continue to exist. The more you depart from reason, the more you depart from reality. And the process of being tattered, as you put it, is painful, I think. I would gladly have you into a room or a discussion or perhaps a ring at some point. I don't want to fight Mike. Mike is just, you never know. I think I've seen him. I think I could win, but you never know with Mike. He's too much of a wild card. P.S. Your conclusions are problematic, I think, although as per usual, I like your thoughts. It's just that I have intersected very precocious individuals such as yourself who have not come together in their differences. But you have differing values. Discord is a fun funk, but it would be nice to bring a few of these young precocious dogs or myself into a civil debate. I would debate Mike at any time when we're both online. It's convenient. As I've said, I'll debate anybody on this channel about anything that I've said publicly. I will defend all of my positions, but basically people don't challenge me. If this is a challenge, then let's do it, Mike. But you have to let's structure it some way, in some capacity, because Mike is what's his name, Dosbook. But you have to structure it in some way and put what is the affirmative, who has the affirmative. We have to actually structure it as some kind of more formal debate, because I don't want it to just go off into what I expect it would go off into. Alas, as you can see, per my YouTube, I open up rooms to which anyone can join and sometimes assume that you might be tuned in. Yeah, I don't have a lot of time at home where I can actually go on and join you. I would like to. If I see that while I'm home, I'll do my best. I've read my Langan and Philosophers of Language. Nonetheless, you might presume some people beneath you with a don't strike down ethos, but that itself is an ignorant oversight, in my honest opinion. I think it's rational for me to presume that some are beneath me in terms of intellect. I should presume that some are above me. Unless I'm the least intelligent person in the world, I should assume that some people are beneath me in intellect. And this follows tautologically almost, not logically really, but if people are watching me, they probably respect my opinion enough to watch me. And so I should presume that the things that I consider cutting edge or like, central to good understanding, people would be interested in finding out about them, or they haven't investigated all of that on their own. If people are familiar with all of the sources of my thinking better than I am, then they probably wouldn't consider my thinking all that original or worth listening to. I don't intoxicate any longer. That's good to hear. So maybe I could hold a coherent discussion with the likes of you. Although I do tend to zigzag a bit to fully wrap around the topics at hand, I don't think you're too dissimilar in this manner. Until we chronologically or diachronically meet again, Das Book, cheers out. All right, yeah. I think we can all respect Das Book, even if we can't always follow his meaning. He has good points, but there's just something jumbled about the whole thing that makes it a little hard. Anyway, Ruben G. This video is full. I have to go really soon now, so I wanted to get to all of them. This video is full of straw men. The claim that only liberalism can allow for discussion and creativity also is absolutely ludicrous. I mean, this is like what characterizes the Enlightenment, basically, and liberalism. Placing reason as super sovereign, we appeal to reason above individual leaders, above kings. There's some kind of absolute truth that we can reach. And this comes out of like the scientific Enlightenment, escaping dogma. Like, this is characteristic of liberalism, and it's not the way I see language discussed and the central figure in the power structures discussed in neo-absolutist thinking. So I don't think it's a straw man. And I'm not saying that only liberalism can allow for discussion and creativity. That is a straw man. Also, we don't say you can't have your metaphysics. We are just trying to rather mediate between these systems instead of having never-ending debates over the primacy of one over the other. Yeah, so what you're saying is, well, you can engage in metaphysical talk, but we're not going to engage with you and argue with it. I think that's reiterating my point. I cannot list all the other baseless assumptions in this video found in an obvious non-engagement with our way of thinking or worldview. There are just too many. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, the one thing he said was itself a straw man. I didn't say only liberalism could, and you acknowledged that you're not going to treat metaphysics as capable of arriving at truth. Metaphysical discussion, you're not going to try to resolve. You're just going to leave there in cooperation with each other, or like balance one linguistic scene with another, coordinate it in power structures. But this is, why do you do this? Only treating metaphysics sincerely and trying to say one metaphysical view is correct can arrive at an ethical justification. So what you're saying is your action is ultimately arbitrary. You're doing it because you can or you want to. You're not doing it because you think it's the right thing to do in any objective sense. This totally confirms what I'm saying. And if it seems like I'm not grasping your system, I think I'm understanding what's underlying it and calling it out as nihilism, both epistemological and moral nihilism. And it makes sense because most of you guys are Nietzscheans. And I'd like to read Doolittle's comment here, but it's not, he's really just like advertising his way of thinking. But actually, I didn't mind this comment so much. Maybe I'm coming around to Kurt. Maybe I'll join the feds with him. That was a joke. Have I read Hayek? He's the father of neoliberalism. Okay, great. I did make it to the end. So John Stuart Mill drew his inspiration for On Liberty from two German philosophers, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe and Wilhelm von Humboldt. Yeah, Goethe was an Enlightenment thinker. In a sense, Goethe inspired German Romanticism, and Humboldt also was like a very rationalistic kind of thinker. He had that, I forget what the book's called, but it was basically like a survey of natural history, or like different, maybe it's called a geography. I forget his famous book, but it's more analytical or like empirical and British in spirit than something like Nietzsche or, Husserl, where they're kind of introspective, romantic, German thinking. As some people may think this statement exaggerated, the testimony of Lord Morley may be worth quoting, who in his recollections speaks of the acknowledged point that the main argument of the essay on liberty was not original but came from Germany. Yeah, I don't really care where analytical thinking came from, whether it was British or some of it was German. I'm saying analytic versus continental in terms of modern philosophy, where you have like all the people, most of the people engaged in a philosophy of science are analytical philosophers, and I think they could solve some epistemological problems, like what Quine did. If you don't understand the history of epistemology, I don't think you're going to get why I think analytical philosophy is important. Not that I've done a lot of reading in it. I mean, I've done some, but I want to do a lot more. And there are always things that I haven't read that I should read. I think there's a lot of stuff more of us should read. And we do tend to get stuck in kind of niches where there are popular ideas that get circled around. Am I still live? It looks like it. Anyway. So, I really don't have time to go through all of the live chats. So, thanks everybody for being here, and I'll read what you were saying later and incorporate those thoughts in future videos that I make. Maybe let me know, though, for those who are still here and who see this, whether I was thinking about making a video about like the kind of global government that I think is like what we should be shooting for in the end, because I've said it's necessary, but I don't like the globalists. So what's the alternative? That's kind of where I'm leaning for what I should do next. Let me know what you think, if that's a good idea, or what you think would be better. But anyway, thank you guys for listening. I'll see you later.